Hi there, this is the first video for population geography of the unit of work global challenges. So I'm going to talk you through what we're going to be looking at in the next few weeks. So what we're going to be looking at is the changing nature and rate of the world's population in this video, and it links to the first part of the syllabus. So over the next few weeks we're going to be looking at those 4 dot points. And we're looking at dot point number 1, the changing nature, rate and distribution of the world's population. I'm going to talk more about the distribution of the world's population in another video. Today I'm just looking at the nature and rate of the world's population. Just to get us started and looking at why it's so important, there's a really interesting map that I thought I'd start with, and that sort of talks about that sort of first dot point. In this circle, there's more people living in it than outside of it. And when you look at that size of that circle, it's relatively small compared to the rest of the world. And when we're talking about population, the reason why population is such an important part of geography is because of the spatial patterns that population has. So geographers were interested in patterns and space, and that's why that circle is so important. More people live inside that circle than outside the rest of the world. It's huge, and that's why it's worth noting just how important the population is. So just to get things started, that's what we mean by population and why it's so important to geographers. We're going to have a lot of vocabulary that we're going to look at. So when we talk about total population, we are talking about every single person on the planet. Life expectancy is the average age you are expected to live to. And we look at population in terms of birth and death rates. Birth rates are the number of babies being born per thousand women per year. Death rates is the number of deaths per thousand per year. Infant mortality is the number of children who die before the age of 5. And mortality rates are similar to death rates in that we have the number of people dying per thousand. And as a result, we sort of divide the world into developed countries and developing countries. Developed countries are rich countries, developing are poorer countries. And there is a close association with population characteristics and how developed a country is. So when we start talking about population, we start using a whole range of vocabulary, and that's why I put it there, because when we look at population, we are looking at stats. It's impossible that we can count everyone, but we do look at stats, and we look at birth rates and death rates, and that's why it's important to have those key vocabulary words discussed. And then I want you to make sure you know those meanings, because in your writing I want you to refer to these words, and that's how you improve your writing, by using those geographical vocabulary. So it's really important, those key words, and I'm going to sort of talk about how in a minute how important and the changing rate and nature of the world's population has been. So remember, the world's population is about 7.5 billion. Australia's population is about 25 million. And just to give you an idea about how big a billion is, that's what it is. It's a 1 with 9 zeros. So at the moment we've got 7.5 billion. I want you to have that in your head so you can visualize that, because in a minute we're going to start talking about how the world's population has changed. Just to give you another sort of bit of an infographic here, a bit more sort of visual understanding of the world's population. This is called a cartogram. Now, a cartogram changes the actual size of countries and represents it into a different stat. So what we've got here is the world's population and where people live. And the more exaggerated it is, means the bigger the population. Now, if you look at Australia, it's tiny in comparison because it has a large area and small population, whereas India and China, that's where people live. So going back to that first picture I showed you of that circle, you can see quite clearly where people live. And again, this is a great, sort of spatial, sorry, not spatial, this is a great visual way of showing just where people live. So this is a really important type of map. It's called cartogram. So make sure you put a definition of what a cartogram is in your Cornell notes. But again, that gives you an idea of the nature and then obviously the distribution of where people live. So India, China, closely followed by Japan, and then obviously North America is pretty big too. Again, this is another way. This is like a dot map. This is a choropleth map showing the different colours. Obviously, the pinker, the redder, darker red, the more distribution. If you look at Australia's, it's very, very white because of the population distribution. But we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in another video. So you can see where people live. Okay, this is what I want to talk about really. This is about the nature and rate of population. So throughout most of human history, our population has cruised along very, very gradual. And we don't have that big increase in population. We're in that stage 1 for most of human history. Birth rates, death rates are high. Before 1800s, the most common cause of death for women was during during pregnancy and giving birth to a child. Death rates are high because families would be about 6 to 10 in size, and before most children became adults, at least half of those kids would die. Remember, 1800 is before we have common medical knowledge. We don't have flu shots, we don't have vaccines, so that's why that death rate is extremely high, and that's why it kept that total population down. Going back to that key vocabulary, can you see what I mean? We talk about birth rates, death rates. Every now and then we would have natural population increases, but it was natural. It was generally pretty low. Generally, the human population up to sort of 1900 was less than 1 billion. As scientific knowledge increased, so we see a natural increase, and that's where we start entering stage 2. And this is from about 1800 to about the 1850s, maybe a bit later, depending on different countries. And what happens, we see a decrease in the death rates, and as a result, we start having our life expectancy increasing. So back in sort of 1850s, life expectancy probably increased from about 40 to about 60 quite quickly, and that's why you can see the population pyramid is like a pyramid. It's a wide base, small top. So what's happened? The birth rate is still high. Death rate is starting to fall rapidly. Then countries enter that stage 3, and this is where we start getting the population explosion. This is around the 1900s. 1900s, we go from 1 billion to about 2 billion in about 100 years. So the rate of change is pretty quick. So we're having this big increase in population. Birth rates, what we start seeing is a fall. Death rates are falling but slowly, and we see that natural increase increasing. Now birth rates are starting to fall, and you might think that's a bit weird. Well, stage 3, obviously if you had a large family, most of those people would still be alive. That's why people stop having large families, and we start seeing the average family size going down to 2. And then we start entering stage 4. This is roughly from the 1970s to about 2000. Birth and death rates start decreasing because people are living longer, life expectancy is increasing, science is improving, so people are living longer, and that's why we see this change in the population pyramid. Stage 5 is what countries like Japan, Italy are now seeing. We're seeing that natural increase is decreasing, and we're seeing population starting to level out. Now, this is in the most advanced developed countries. Some countries in the world at this moment are still at stage 3. Why is that? Because the technology has not got to those countries, and that's why population is increasing. Why we've got such a big population in India and China, they're in stage 4, possibly stage 5, and it will take about 100 years for that population to start leveling off and decreasing, because it's taken that time for science to kick in and for population to stabilise. I know it's been a bit of a long video, lots of information thrown at you, but that's just a brief history of population and talking about the rate and nature of population and touching on population distribution. I hope that helps you. What I'll be doing, I'll be showing you another video clip that explains this in more detail as well. All right, thanks for that.